Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You're tuned in to Capturing Mother Nature with Mike Mezeul II, hosted by OWC. And for that, I'd like to welcome who is not out. I thought you'd be like out running from storms or like half a roof over your head or something. Mike
Yeah, that was
Mezeul.
yesterday.
It was yesterday. I'm like, it's surprisingly calm. Where's all like the tornadoes and Mother Nature
Yeah.
happenings going on around you? It's nice and quiet.
These are the days that most people love because they're like, I'm gonna go lay by the pool, and I'm like, I'm bored out of my mind. I'm like, I need some action. I need some clouds. Let's
If there's
go
no near
watch
death
Twister again.
experiences, yeah,
Yeah,
let's we'll
exactly.
throw a Twister on in the background. Well, look, this is going to be like the real life version. Suck out the Hollywood aspect. We're getting the real deal here. I was telling Mike before we went live, I'm probably more excited than anybody to watch this because I have to live vicariously through the people who actually go out and do these things like Mike. So, wonderful work. We're going to drop some links to Mike's work as well. And I will invite everybody, if you do have any questions, we also have Chris from OWC who's hanging out in the background here. So if you guys have any tech questions, questions about OWC products, feel free to drop those into the YouTube chat. Don't wait until the end for any questions. Mike will take some during. If there's something that's really burning and you want to ask about a particular question, feel free to drop it in. But we will have some Q&A at the end as well. So, Mike, I'm going to do what I do best, get out of your way, and I'll turn it over to you. I'll see you at the end for some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, buddy. And I am gonna start sharing my screen here real quick and make sure that we are good here with. All right. Can you guys see my keynote here?
We are a go.
Right on. All right. So first off, I want to thank everybody for having me along and coming to join. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about talking about. Uh, my work out in, Tornado Alley and volcanoes. So I do a lot more work than just this, but this is kind of like my bread and butter. So to get to share some of the stories, the workflow, the ideas, the failures, everything that goes into this is what I like to talk about. So. Thank you guys to OWC and B&H for having me along and getting to share my passion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and nerd out, as I like to call it. We're gonna go with Twisters coming out. I figured I'd start talking about shooting Tornado Alley first, and then we'll kind of dive into volcanoes. But before we go down that path, let's kind of talk about who in the heck I am, who you listening to. My name is Mike Mezeul II. It's pronounced Mezeul. Everybody says Mezeul, Muzel, Muscle, whatever. I've been called far worse, but Mezeul is the proper pronunciation of it. I was born in Rome, New York, which is way upstate, and I currently reside down in Dallas, Texas. And I'm an extreme nature and landscape photographer, dog dad. I've played hockey my whole life and just an overall nerd. I love everything nature and science. Also a Nikon ambassador and OWC ambassador as well. So it's a privilege to work with those amazing brands. So where did this all begin? Well, this right here. This was yours truly at the age of 16. It's also a good reflection to myself as to why I never had a girlfriend in high school. But I don't know if it's the sandals or the orange shorts or perhaps the weather vehicle behind me. But at a young age, I was always in love with the weather, and I wanted to study the weather. I started my degree at the University of Oklahoma studying atmospheric science, but then life took me other ways. But when I was getting into weather and studying it, I also got my first camera, which was a Yashica MG1 film camera, and tied those two passions together. I tied my passion for photography and my passion for storms together. And what I'm about to show you guys, I want you to hold your questions about prints till the end of the presentation. But this gem was my very first lightning photograph that I ever took. And this is back when I was learning photography. I thought you took lightning photographs by standing underneath your parents' porch, pointing your camera to the sky, and as soon as you saw a flash, you took a picture. And that's exactly how I captured this. And I promise you, my work has come a little bit from this back in the day, but I like to share this photo because this is where I started. Everybody starts somewhere, and I think it's important not to forget that. But over the years, my work's improved, and I have learned more and more about photographing storms. And today I'm going to share with you guys some of my thoughts on photographing storms and how I approach them. But first and foremost, everybody wants to know what in the heck do you use while you're out in the field to capture the images you capture? So, what's in my bag? Whether I am off in Tornado Alley photographing storms or I'm traveling to Guatemala to photograph volcanoes. I have multiple camera bodies. The Z9, Z8 are my bread and butter. Multiple focal lengths, anywhere from the 14 to 24, 24 to 70, all the way up to the 100 or 400. And on certain instances, I'll even bring out the 105 macro lens. Camera body rain covers because, storms, they do rain. Polarizing filter, which we'll get into a little bit later on. That's why I bring that with me there. I also take with me more cards than I can count on one hand. Those are the OWC Atlas Ultra cards, which they range all the way from 325 gigabytes up to terabyte. And sometimes I even bring 2 terabyte cards out there with me, and we'll talk about why later on. Multiple portable hard drives for backing up. So those are going to be the Onbuy Pro FX and the Electron hard drives, a Benro Mach 3 tripod, and then my DJI Mavic 3 Pro drone. So there's quite a bit that comes with me on these adventures. Not all the time is it all being used, but I'd rather have it than not have it. Workflow, everybody asks me, how do I operate out in the field? Well, basically, it's a run and gun situation, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about how my workflow is with storms in regards to volcanoes later on. But basically, like I said, it's shooting on the Atlas Ultra cards and then using the CF Express card readers to get it onto the portable hard drives. And then when I get home, I'll go ahead and take those portable hard drives and back it all the way up to my Thunder Bay 8 drive here, which I've got sitting right next to me. And I absolutely love that thing because it makes accessing all my work very, very easy and streamlined and makes it really nice for me when I'm putting together my films. I have everything in one spot. So storms versus volcanoes. People often ask me, which do you prefer to shoot? And I can't answer that because that's like picking my favorite kid. But I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the differences in them. Storms are a little bit more predictable. You have a small window of opportunity. Storm season in the United States is typically kind of end of March, all the way through beginning of July. Sometimes, depending on how you position yourself with the storm or how fast the storm is moving or bad life decisions that day of leaving too late, you may have minutes to hours with the storm. And then for me personally, I focus primarily on still imagery and time-lapse work when I'm out there. And speed is necessary to get content out to the news. So if I'm working for, getting imagery or content out on the wire, I have to be quite efficient and quite quick with getting those images out onto or off my card, onto a hard drive, and then out the door to the news. Because believe it or not, it's a very competitive industry out there with getting your storm work out there, and especially with movies like Twister and now Twisters. It's becoming quite popular, believe it or not, to be out in Tornado Alley photographing these storms. Volcanoes, a bit different. I have to be ready at a moment's notice. We can kind of understand when a volcano is becoming primed, quote unquote, for an eruption. But I always have a bag ready to go with all that I need to document a volcano, which is like my gas mask, my sulfur dioxide meters, helmets, gloves, etc. And I basically have a plane ticket ready at all times when things are getting, let's call it close to eruption time. And these eruptions can last anywhere from hours to months. So if you're familiar with the eruption that we're going to talk about later on, which is the eruptions that are taking place within Iceland, I've been out there before where the eruptions have lasted 8 hours, and I've been out there before where the eruptions have lasted almost 6 months. For volcanoes, I focus primarily on stills and 4K, 8K video. Time lapses for volcanoes doesn't really do too much for me. There's not a lot in a time lapse sense that I find compelling with volcanoes, but more of the 4K, 8K video, sometimes 120 frames per second as well. That can be really empowering when I'm documenting volcanoes. My end goal there is to produce a small short film, which hopefully at the end of this I'll get to share with you guys, or stock footage. that can be used for different documentaries. I can't talk much about what I'm currently working on, but if you guys keep an eye to the TV next summer, you'll probably see quite a bit of my work from Iceland and Guatemala in a volcano documentary, let's call it. So a little bit of a difference between documenting these two subject matters. So let's start with tornadoes and storms. So day of the chase, what's it like? What goes into capturing a photo of a supercell or a tornado? Well, it's a lot, to be honest with you guys. It's a lot of work. It's exhausting mentally and physically. So I'm based out of Dallas. Depending on where the forecast for that day is, I'm typically wheels up out of here about 6 to 9 a.m. Easily, you can drive 800 miles in a day. It's called storm chasing for a reason because you're chasing the storm. I wish it was as easy as I just sit around and let the storms come to me. That would be so much more convenient. But you have to chase the storms, and those storms move. So you're driving quite a bit. And you're always checking data along the way and, refining what we call your target area. So, there's days that I've woken up and I said, hey, I'm going to go up to Oklahoma City, and I end up in Southwest Kansas because dynamics are always changing, and I have to, once again, go where the storms are. So there's a lot of moving around. I kind of relate chasing storms to chess. Like nature makes a move, you make a move. Nature makes a move, you make a move, and you're trying to get in the best position to document that storm. No matter how good the forecast looks, though, you can easily drive hundreds of miles in a day and have nothing. I've driven from Dallas to Wichita, Kansas, gotten a Dairy Queen. It was the most expensive Dairy Queen I've ever gotten. Turned back home and tucked the tail and called it a day. So this is what a lot of people think storm chasing is like. And if you've seen the new Twisters movie, I promise you, it has its exciting moments, but there's a lot of Hollywood to that. So this is what my mom and everybody thinks chasing is like.
Holy moly!
So people think it's nonstop action all the time, but in reality, it's a lot of downtime, a lot of working on your suntan, and a lot of learning, let's just call it how to work out while on the road. Windmill shadows, they make an excellent jump rope. So it's not just all action-packed all the time. So there's a lot of waiting involved as well. While you're waiting, I have a kind of what's approach to chasing is I'd rather be there 5 hours early than 5 minutes late. So I found myself waiting quite a bit. But during that waiting game, you are checking the data nonstop. You're watching how storms are starting to form, and maybe what convection's looking a little bit more interesting in regards to what storm it's going to try and produce. We're also studying the road maps for possible issues. I've run into issues before where roads have been closed because a bridge is out or because of flooding from previous day's storms. So you're checking the roads to make sure there's nothing that's going to kind of interrupt your chase when you get going. I'm prepping the gear, making sure my gear is nice and clean. I'm going ahead and making sure that, my memory cards are all ready to go and formatted. And if you're not familiar with OWC's Energize, you can use that program there to go ahead and make sure you're checking the health of your memory cards. You're also sanitizing your memory cards so they're back to the factory settings essentially when you are ready to go. That way you're not going to run into any issues. And you could also use that program to update the firmware to make sure that the firmware of the card is updated with the latest and greatest firmware of your camera. So all of that's taking place before a project or a chase. And then most importantly, working on a very extremely sexy summer tan, which if you guys have ever been out storm chasing with me or out with a tour group, you realize very quickly how hot the Central Plains are when there are no storms. My thoughts and visions though, while I'm waiting are I'm trying to understand the storm initiation and the timing. So what I mean by that is where the storm is going to initially fire, Also, is it going to be a storm that goes up at 3 p.m. or is it going to be more of a storm that goes up, an hour before sunset? All of that helps me kind of have an idea in my head of how I'm going to position myself amongst the storm to work the best light and the best conditions for the images of the time lapse that I'm going to create. The storm motion and the dynamics. So how fast are these storms going to be moving? Are they going to be moving east at 55 miles an hour to where it's more run and gun and I'm going to be able to hop out, take a couple pictures, get back in the car, keep going? Or are they going to be moving more like 10 miles an hour to where I have the time to set up a time lapse or maybe two time lapses and let that storm slowly come to me? I'm also looking for foreground. I am a huge foreground snob. I love having a foreground. I feel like it helps create such wonderful compositions and tell a story. But if you've ever been through, say, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, there's a lot of wheat fields, a lot of cornfields, and that's really it. Every now and then you get lucky with a random barn, and I'll kind of show you guys here in a second how I kind of keep those foregrounds that I see in the back of my head. I'm also studying the light, like I mentioned earlier, the timing of the storm that plays a role in, am I going to have kind of that golden hour light for the storm to photograph, or is it going to be more broad daylight? Uh, for me, it's not about a tornado. Tornadoes are a bonus. And if you go out and all you want to see is a tornado, you're going to be let down quite a bit. So for me, I really love some good storm structure. These storms come in all different shapes and sizes and textures and colors, and I absolutely love shooting lightning. So if I can walk away with one photo of the day that is a storm with good structure or a lightning bolt, then I'm ecstatic. If I get a tornado, that's an absolute bonus. But no storm photo, no volcano photo is worth your life. So, safety is always first. And I've called off many chases because of, too fast to storm motions or bad visibility. And for me, I love this. I want to come back and do it. I've done it for many, many years. I want to come back and do it the next day. So it's okay to tuck your tail and know your limitations as well. So I mentioned foreground. Foreground is pretty scarce throughout Tornado Alley. But when I'm driving and I see something of interest, what I'll do is I'll take a photo on my phone and it's all geotagged. So if I find myself in that area a week later, I can look on my phone and see what foreground I have shot. And then I keep that in the back of my mind saying, hey, if the storm moves down this way, I might have this foreground to utilize. And over the years, I've been doing this quite a while. I've collected quite the library of foregrounds throughout Tornado Alley, which is really nice. So now if I know on a certain day I'm going to be chasing Southwest Kansas, I can quickly open up my phone, look at all the geotags from the Southwest Kansas area and start kind of studying what foreground options are there in case that storm lines up. So yeah, this shot here, this is from the Texas Panhandle several years back. And they got very, very lucky with seeing this old truck that was in the middle of the field here. I had my storm chasing or my storm photography workshop with me. And as soon as we saw this, pulled over, I was yelling at everybody to get out of the car and grab their gear because we just came across a unicorn. And I was running across the field forgetting that rattlesnakes were even a thing out here. And we shot for hours as this storm moved past us with lightning and modest clouds. And the scene was great, the sky was great, but you can see how the foreground here that really just helps tell of a story here, especially like older foreground. It's just kind of that nice juxtaposition between, the storm and the wear and tear of the environment around it. It's kind of like if these walls could talk, right? So foreground for me is if I can get it, I'm going to get it, but it is so hard to find a foreground, and it's also so hard to find an opportunity to shoot. And that's why storm photography for me is so rewarding, because if you get one shot from that day, that is a heck of a day because there's a lot of challenges. Some of the challenges involved are large hail. That's hail that is the size of grapefruits right there. Also, snakes. That is something that we run into quite a bit out there. Bad visibility. So I want to show you guys a quick little clip here of just how fast you can have a shot and then lose that shot out there. And that tornado that I showed you guys the video of just a few minutes ago, that tornado is right behind me, and I'm trying to find a place to pull over and photograph it, but this happens. There's our road, and there goes our road, and we have a giant tornado behind us. So it is quite challenging out there to find the opportune moment to shoot because everything is changing and there's so much that is not in your control. Here's another road that we went over a couple days later that just completely flooded out. So it is quite challenging, the moral of the story here, to get a good storm photo. But is it worth it? All the waiting, all the headaches, all the worries, all the things that are out of your control, is it worth it? The answer is 125% yes. I've been doing this now, gosh, 23 years. Yeah, wow, I feel old now. 23 years I've been chasing and I love it. Every single time I go out there, it is completely worth it. The moment you see that storm begin to form, you run through a bunch of emotions. You start thinking to yourself, okay, am I going to be safe today? Are these towns that I've driven through, are they going to be safe? Well, what kind of storm is this going to form? Is it going to be one that is really murky and, maybe I don't get anything out of it? Or is it going to be one that is perfectly structured and colorful and looks twisted? The anticipation builds, the suspense builds. Um, and each storm, the thing that I love, each time you chase, it's different. So no storms, no two storms are alike. And that's what I love about photographing them is that you can go to Half Dome in Yosemite, and Half Dome is gonna be Half Dome. You can go to Skogafoss Waterfall in Iceland, and Skogafoss Waterfall is going to be Skogafoss Waterfall. You're literally photographing storms and clouds that are going to, at the end of the day, vanish into thin air and never be seen again. So for me, I love the suspense, the mystery in what I'm going to see here. So this is a storm out here in Leote, Kansas, and I love telling the story behind this one because this is a prime example of how there is no foreground out in some of these areas. So I was looking for a way to shoot this beautiful storm, and I was driving in from the west. So the left side of this frame is west. So all we had was this dirt field, and I could see a hint of green coming on the horizon. I knew that was going to be another field. And when we got to that next field, we had this perfect kind of contrast of the dark dirt versus the bright green. And when I took a few of the first frames from the road, it lacked depth. So I did what any smart photographer would do in the middle of a lightning storm, and I got on top of my car, became the tallest object in the middle of this area, and that helped kind of elongate the road and give me a perspective of like this vanishing point. And also, more importantly, what happened is it gave a sense of scale. And you have to look very closely here to get that sense of scale. And what happened is another vehicle drove by me. And if you look right towards the vanishing point of the road right here, that little black speck is another vehicle. So then all of a sudden now, once you realize what you're looking at, you have a whole new perspective on just how big this storm is. Next year, another beautiful supercell. It looks completely different. This is a storm that went on for hours and took on so many different shapes and forms. And I'll show you guys here in a few how this storm transformed over time. But once again, it looks completely different than the previous frame. Another storm, looking completely different than the two. And what I like to do is I like to find, if I can, a way to tie in maybe a human element or something like I did earlier with scale, because these storms, what a lot of people don't realize is they're shot super wide. So maybe 14 millimeters, sometimes, 15, 16 millimeters. You don't have a sense of scale. You don't have an idea of just how big these storms are unless you can relate it to a car or a house. And these storms, they're the size of counties. They're going up 60, 70,000 feet into the atmosphere. They're massive. So if I can find a way to kind of tie in a story between scale, or like here, I love the juxtaposition of like, a human element versus a natural element. That is what I'm looking for out there. But I've also learned over the years you can't be too picky because you are most of the time in the middle of nowhere. So foreground doesn't really come quite frequently. Another shot here that I love to share is this one right here. Just so you guys know that when I post process these images, I do so in a manner to where it's representative of what nature is really showing. I'm not saturating the colors. I'm not doing a ton of mid-tone contrast to really bring out the sharpness of the edges. Like I think that nature is absolutely wonderful in itself, and it's showing such a beautiful thing right there in front of me. Why do I need to go ahead and try to take it to the next step by, photoshopping it too much or saturating the colors too much? So what you're seeing here and what you're going to see in the next frame are two storms in their purest of forms. This storm right here, everybody, wants to see the big tornado warned storms. This storm did not have any sort of tornado associated with it. But I can tell you that right where you see that dark cloud kind of fade into the blue at the bottom there, we have softball size hail and 80-mile-an-hour winds. So this storm presents its own hazards as well. So it doesn't just have to be a tornado warned storm to look photogenic. All these storms, and some of the storms that I've photographed over my career that are some of my favorite images, they're not tornado warned storms, or some of them aren't even supercells. This guy is a supercell though, and this is one of the craziest environments that I have been in probably the last 5, 6 years. Um, this is what I call the dirt eater. And storms, they have all these different mechanics to them, right? And one mechanic, one part of the storm is what we call the inflow, and it's basically like a vacuum. The storm is just ingesting warm, moist air that it needs to grow and to strengthen and to continue its life. But this particular storm, West Texas was going through a pretty severe drought, so it moved over this really, really dry field and it was just ingesting all this red dirt. And if you've ever been out to West Texas or Western Oklahoma, you know what the red dirt looks like. As it was being ingested into the storm, it started to change all the hues in the sky as well and felt extremely apocalyptic. So I pulled out my Nikon 14 to 24 right here, big old wide shot, found a little pump jack down there to kind of put into the frame to kind of give it some sort of scale so you have an understanding of just how big this storm is. Um, Pretty wild scene. I wish I had video to show you guys of this moment, but there's at least 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds at my back trying to push me into the storm, which is that inflow. And it was just this continuous ingestion of the dirt around. So pretty amazing. And I love these moments too when I'm shooting storms where you can see them actually interacting with the surface of the earth, right? These storms take place above our head in the atmosphere, but when you can see how these storms are responsible for helping sculpt some of the landscape that we live upon, it's pretty impressive. What also is impressive is that some of these storms are just so massive, absolutely so massive that you can't capture them in a 14 millimeter or a 12 millimeter lens. And this is an example right here. This is an 8-image panorama shot vertically at 14 millimeters to show the whole scope of this storm. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, that's looking pretty much due west. And if you look on the far right corner, that's looking almost northeast. So just a huge range of field of view here, and just something that you can't necessarily capture in one frame. So panoramas are a technique that I do utilize while I'm out there when these storms are that big. Also, for those that are interested, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Part of the challenge, like I mentioned earlier, is visibility. There's a tornado on the storm, and if you can tell me where it is, 10 gold stars that are worth no value whatsoever. But that is the other reason why I backed off on the storm to get more of the structure is because I had no clue where the tornado was in here. Couldn't see it, couldn't figure out where it was. It was unsafe to approach it, so I backed off and I focused on the storm structure instead. All right. I mentioned earlier the changing environment of these storms, the different characteristics that they can show within X amount of time. So if we go back, I'm gonna zoom on back here for a quick second. This storm is this storm just a few hours later. So you can see how that storm has already taken a completely different look. And the next three slides are going to show you guys how quickly things can change out there. And what I do love about photographing storms is how, you can blink and all of a sudden that storm has a completely different look to it. So this is a shot right here. We're coming into getting close to sunset. And then about, yeah, let's call it maybe 15, 20 minutes later, actually. Our storm now looks like this. And then just a few minutes later, the storm looks like this. These are all the same storms. So you can see how we're getting so many different personalities within the storm here and so many different looks to it. And I think that's what keeps me on a storm. It's very easy to get a few shots. I could easily have said, all right, I got this shot. I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat dinner. But I would have missed these two shots right here. So storms require patience, they require persistence, and kind of sitting back and giving nature the reins, right? It's quite fascinating how a storm can enter a different area of dynamics and quickly change its shape, its color, its texture, the visibility of the storm. Now you guys can also see a prime example right here of yours truly having no foreground to work with and just having to take with what I've got here. I would have loved to have some sort of cool foreground here, but it was not necessarily safe to go too much further north due to large hail. And if I had gone a little further south, which would have been the left-hand side of the frame here, I would have lost this really unique perspective of the storm right here. So kind of had to settle for just a green field with some houses. But that's just how it goes. There's not necessarily a lot that you can control out there except just being there. And, one of my favorite sayings is if you're not there, you're only going to hear about it. So that is why you have to chase and you have to give each storm an opportunity to show you what nature is going to show you. Because if you aren't there, you're just going to see pictures of, somebody else being there. So lightning, I wanted to include a couple little educational pieces here too with you guys. A lot of people, I don't encourage going to chase storms, but if you happen to live in, the Central Plains or somewhere where you get lightning, give you guys a few quick tips on how to photograph it. So there are three different times a day essentially where you can photograph lightning: daytime, sunset/twilight, and nighttime. Daytime lightning is the most challenging lightning to photograph. You have, excuse me, you have lots of ambient light. You have bright light on ambient light, so it is extremely difficult to utilize long exposures. One of my workshop students summed it up best, and I asked them if I could use their quote, and they said yes. Baby, and basically they said, "It makes you want to punch a baby." That is how stressful shooting daytime lightning can be. Don't recommend doing that, but daytime lightning is one of the hardest types of lightning to photograph. And really, there are two ways to be able to photograph it. And that is by using some sort of lightning trigger, which is like a myops trigger, or just doing a time lapse and hoping that your photo happens or the lightning bolt happens while you are time lapsing and you're open. It's not my favorite time of day to shoot, so I typically will go ahead and say I'm going to just time lapse, and if I get a bolt of lightning, I get lucky, and I can celebrate. But if I don't get any lightning, at least I get a time lapse. Sunset and twilight lightning, this is definitely my favorite time of day to shoot. I love the colors that you can get associated with those times of day. You can also start utilizing longer exposure times. It just makes life a little bit easier, and it puts the odds in your favor when you're able to start using 2, 3, 4, 5 second long exposures to capture that lightning bolts. It can be quite difficult at times though, because you may be looking, for instance, with this photograph, you may be looking into the sunlight, so you maybe need to underexpose a little bit to control the highlights of the sunset. But it is way, way easier, and I find a higher success rate with lightning at sunset and twilight than I do with daytime lightning. Two more quick examples of shooting at sunset on the left there, and then blue hour twilight on the right side. If you guys are out there and you want to try and photograph lightning, definitely utilize manual focus and manually focus on the horizon. Also, study the storm. Get an idea before you start pointing your camera at maybe which part of the storm is producing more of the lightning and aim that direction. Lightning can be quite frustrating, as we just said a second ago, because you may point your camera this way and then it strikes just off the frame to the left, and you move your frame to the left and it strikes where you're pointing just a second ago. It takes persistence, patience, and luck to do so. And that is the nice thing about shooting digitally now is, I could throw in a 1 terabyte card and, have thousands of photos to go through and to shoot, as opposed to back when I was shooting storms on film, it's 24 or 36 frames, and it gets quite expensive shooting lightning because most of those frames are just dead sky and you've missed your shot. So shoot more than you think you need to. That's the nice thing about having these higher capacity cards is you don't really have to worry about kind of running out of space there. Nighttime lightning, it can be fun. It's not my favorite time of the day to shoot lightning, just because usually it's a very high contrast scene. It's like a bright lightning bolt on a darker sky. So it's not really doing it for me. The only time that I really find nighttime lightning to be quite interesting is if you are photographing, say, monsoon season, and you're in Arizona where you're starting to see lightning strike down on landscapes and illuminating the landscapes, and you can see the contact points. So, for example, this image right here, this was shot in downtown Tucson a couple years ago. And this is probably one of my favorite nighttime lightning shots because you can see those contact points on the mountains. You can see how the light radiates out and illuminates the landscape. So yeah, nighttime shooting takes a special shot for me to get excited about, but it's also the easiest lightning to shoot because you could really just drag your shutter for 20, 30 seconds and really, really put the odds in your favor. It's also nice too when you have a storm that is, pretty beastly. This is a tornadic supercell in, I think this was Kansas, and we really couldn't see a dang thing structurally on the storm, except for when the lightning lit up the storm. We got an idea of how it's taking shape and maybe the area of tornadic activity where that was going to be. So that is kind of my gist with daytime sunset twilight lightning and nightfall lightning. Sunset twilight, that's going to always be my go-to. But if you've never shot lightning before, I don't want to discourage you. Shoot whenever you can get it, because you guys saw my very first lightning strike, or my very first photo of lightning, I should say. I remember how ecstatic I was when I saw that show up, and it's quite rewarding when you finally get the shot, and it only makes you want to go shoot more. Now, I will have to confess to you guys too, I cheat at times. And what do I mean by that is I choose to shoot with not just one, but two cameras. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes I have double the amount of images to go through and delete. But this is a prime example of it paying off big. This is down shooting monsoon season, southeast of Tucson, Arizona. Beautiful storm was moving over this area. So I decided, hey, I'm going to set up a 24-70, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that that mountain gets struck. Well, it did. And this is the 24-70 shot. And while I was waiting, I said, you know what? I've got another camera. Let's risk it for the biscuit. Let's go way tight. Let's go 200 millimeters. And that camera was also open. The shutter was also open when this bolt happened. And this was the resulting shot. So got really, really lucky here. Now, I have had times when both cameras have missed the shot, and sometimes I will set up my cameras when I'm doing like interval timer shooting or I'm time-lapsing to get lightning. I'll start one and then I'll wait a second, I'll start the other, so that way they're kind of alternating. But if you have the ability to shoot with two cameras, that obviously doubles your odds. But it can still fail at times and you miss the shots on both cameras, which is extremely frustrating. I love sharing the shot. Everybody asks me, you've been shooting storms and lightnings for so long, do you still get excited? Well, this was me in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, and this is from my dash cam. So to answer your question, if I still get excited shooting lightning, yep, the answer is 100% yes. Still get excited, still get thrilled. I'm always even more excited than that to get the camera home, get the cards offloaded onto the hard drive, and then to really see them on the back of, not back of the camera, but see them on the computer. So it is quite rewarding. Tornadoes, with twisters coming out, everybody's wanting to see a tornado now, and I will tell you guys, it is exhilarating. It is harder than you think to see a tornado, but there is a beauty to them. I'm not a huge fan of photographing tornadoes that are doing any sort of damage to life and property. It's a huge swing of emotions to see a tornado like this going through an open field, and then it all of a sudden goes into a town, and then you're almost angry at what you were just excited to see. So for me, I focus primarily on shooting tornadoes that are over open land. I will shoot them if they are going into a town, but that is very quickly into a journalistic mode. And that is to kind of help tell the story of what the people have been through there and to get things out to the wire to help start raising awareness for how people may need help. So Joplin, Missouri was a prime example of documenting a tornado in that way. Quick little clip of what it's like here. So this is the perfect unicorn tornado for me. Slow moving, good light, nice contrast, moving through an open field. And the resulting shot was this right here. This is about, I believe it's 50 or 40 millimeters. I ran out into the field there. If you notice the power lines that were there before in the video, I ran out past those because I didn't want those in my frame. Threw on, I think it was the Nikon 24 to 120 that I had on for this shot here, and got this beautiful shot. Like I said, this is why I chase. This is why or what I would look for in a tornado photo is, beautiful side lighting, nothing, no big debris in the air, so you're not seeing somebody's home being torn apart. You're just seeing this lovely, what we call danger noodle coming across the landscape there. And the cool thing about this tornado too, that I'm going to show you guys here in the next couple slides too, is how it took so many different shapes and characteristics, once again, just like the storms in itself. So we went from this beautiful side lit tornado, and what I could tell was happening here, and you guys saw it in the video, is a little bit of rain was starting to come into the scene, and the sun was to my back. So when I saw the rain coming in between me and the tornado, and then I knew the sun was at my back. Well, whenever you guys have the sun behind you and rain in front of you, odds are you're going to get a rainbow. So when I'm chasing, I always keep a circular polarizer in my pocket. And I grabbed that polarizer, threw it on real quick in anticipation of what was about to happen. And this was the resulting scene. Same tornado, double rainbow coming across. You guys can see the rain and the hail that was starting to come down. And with that open sky behind me for all that sunlight to get in and that precipitation starting to wrap around the tornado, bam, rainbow. And if you guys remember at the beginning of my presentation, I said, hey, one of the things that's in my bag is a polarizer. Well, this is exhibit A as to why I carry that polarizer with me, because I'm able to throw that polarizer on, rotate it. And if you're not familiar with rainbows and polarizers, when you use a polarizer with a rainbow and you rotate it, you can actually help enhance the saturation of the colors. And all of a sudden what will happen too is you'll notice at one point when you rotate that polarizer that the rainbow is going to vanish. And that's when you've reached your maximum polarization. So you kind of go back on the polarizer and it really can help bring out those colors. So we went from this to this, and just a few minutes later, the storm moved a little bit further away. The rain where I was at stopped, but there's still a little bit of rain wrapping around the tornado. And we had this shot right here. So this is the beginning of what's called the rope out phase, as the tornado is starting to shrink, becomes kind of like a snake-like object in the sky. And I backed off here because I wanted to not necessarily have such a zoomed in shot because there's a lot of storytelling elements going on here that I wanted to capture. The first was, if you look in the bottom left corner, you can see that tree has a lot of the vegetation stripped off of it, as well as that giant barrel. That's part of the damage path. I also wanted to show scale by having the windmills rather small amongst the tornado in the background there, so you guys can see a little bit of scale, just how large this tornado is. And then, of course, having the rainbow slash very faint double rainbow in the frame. So that's kind of why I opted for a little bit wider focal length here. I think this was shot maybe around 30 millimeters. So I could sit here and talk with you guys all day long about storms, but I do want to dip into the other subject matter that I'm quite passionate about, and that is volcanoes and how I focus a little bit differently out there on my workflow. So once again, with storms, it's more still imagery and time lapse. So when I'm out there, I'm shooting, thousands of images on my time lapses. I am usually uploading images very quickly to a smaller SSD while I'm out there, and then getting the images out to any sort of news agency that I may be working with that day to help kind of say, hey, here's what happened here weather-wise. But for volcanoes, let's talk about what happens there. So back in 2000 and I think it was 15, I don't want to say I ever got bored of storms, but I started wondering what else was out there that can show how impressive and how powerful and how majestic and how beautiful nature could be. I covered some blizzards and I learned that those are quite white. I covered some hurricanes and I realized that those are like sitting in a car wash. And then I started to dive into volcanoes and I was like, wow, these have quite a bit of power. They also have quite the visual spectacle, right? So I've been fortunate enough to document multiple volcanoes across the world now, from Kilauea to the Fuego and Pacaya volcanoes, to Fagurasfia, to Mauna Loa, and hopefully coming this year as well would be Etna and possibly the Yazur volcano. Um, but volcanoes are a completely different beast and a completely different approach in regards to photography and to telling a story. So, what are some of those challenges and some of those thoughts that go into covering them? First off, access. The thing about storms is nobody's there to tell you, hey, you can't go to that storm. The access to volcanoes is different amongst countries. Some of the volcanoes here in the States reside within Hawaii's Volcanoes National Park, so they have limitations and restrictions there. Some of the other countries like Iceland are like, hey, come enjoy our volcano, just don't die. Now there's restrictions within Iceland because the volcanic activity has now moved into an area that is threatening life and property. So access is something that dictates how you can tell your story. The ever-changing conditions, is it rainy? Is it windy? Are you dealing with a volcano that's putting out a lot of sulfur dioxide and there's no wind and it's pooling in this area? So now you have to worry about sulfur dioxide issues. Um, the heat, projectiles, there's a lot that goes into it. The Fuego volcano, which is pictured here on the right, is a absolutely wonderful volcano that I have very close ties to in Guatemala. I love being close, but with this volcano versus one that we're going to talk about here in a second, the projectiles here are, sometimes the size of small cars. So you have to be very, very careful on how you approach this type of eruption. But overall, my thoughts remain the same for each volcano, and that's to tell a story. Some of these volcanoes are erupting maybe every 20, 30 minutes. So you have to figure out how to make that story interesting for a volcano that's erupting, every day. Or sometimes, it's a more unique story. For example, Mauna Loa erupting for the first time since 1984. I'm trying to shoot diversely. So I find that if you're not careful, volcano photos can become very similar and just cliche. So I'm always trying to figure out how I can utilize different lenses, different techniques, aerial versus ground-based photography to tell a story and to separate my work from others. And something I've learned as well is shoot like each day that you have this opportunity to capture this eruption like it's the last day of the eruption, because it could turn off at any point in time. And there's times when I've been out documenting a volcano and I'm like, hey, I'm hungry, I'm cold, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll just get this shot tomorrow. And then guess what? Tomorrow just doesn't happen because the volcano stopped erupting. Challenges as well, lava. That is the least of my worries. One of my sponsors, Benro, they love this photo because I literally called them afterwards. I wasn't paying attention, and the surface flow came out and took out the tripod. And I said, hey, I need a new tripod. Yours is currently in lava. There's also the heat. This is a moment when I was documenting Iceland's eruption in 2021. And like I mentioned to you guys, I like to be close, and I'll show you why here in a second. But a buddy of mine mentioned, he's like, hey, Mike, what's wrong with your pants? I said, what do you mean what's wrong with my pants? And I looked down and my pants were crispy. So luckily, I had a base layer on underneath that and didn't have the Gore-Tex melt to my skin, which is, probably quite unpleasant. But what goes into documenting a volcano, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be ready on a moment's notice, essentially. Volcanoes can erupt with little to no warning, but usually there is some sort of indication that, hey, you should probably put the pants on, pack the bag, and get ready. Iceland in 2021 was a prime example of that. So if you've never been to Iceland, Iceland is a very, very volcanic island. They have multiple active volcanoes, but what caught my eye in March of 2021 is this. This is what is called an earthquake swarm. And there were over 40,000 earthquakes within a small window of time on the Reykjanes Peninsula. And you guys can see how these earthquakes look very linear, right? They look like they're in a line, which was indicative of some sort of dike intrusion, magma essentially coming up into the Earth's crust and trying to find a way upward for an eruption. So I was watching this, and I was watching it very, 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 very closely, going, holy cow, I want to get out there for that eruption. Well, on March 19th, Iceland erupted. And Iceland, being Iceland, put a webcam up to show the eruption site. And it was perfect. It was away from any sort of town. It was in a area that was relatively easy to get to. It was like a 5-mile hike, but it wasn't anywhere that you would have any really difficult challenges of getting to it. It wasn't challenging or wasn't threatening life or property. It was what we would call a friendly eruption. And so when it erupted, I was like, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. But unfortunately, at that time, COVID was hot and heavy, and Iceland had closed their borders. So that was the worst thing ever, was watching this beautiful eruption that you wanted to tell its story and having no way whatsoever on getting over there. So I watched this webcam day in, day out, hour by hour, just watching how it was changing and how unique it was and how it was literally the perfect eruption to go photograph and to show the beauty of this volcano. It was also quite historic. It was the first time that there was an eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula in 800 years. And also the first time Fagradalsfjall, the volcano, had erupted in 6,000 years. So I really wanted to go and tell this story. But Iceland had their borders closed. So what happened? Well, Iceland opened their borders on April 8th. And I was on the first flight from the United States over there. And I had gotten over there, immediately got off the plane and booked it out to the eruption. And I could tell you that I think it was 2 weeks, so much had changed. So much had changed. And I had storyboarded out everything that I wanted to photograph and how I wanted to tell this story. And fun fact, when I storyboard out my projects, I take these little 3x5 note cards and I draw out basically the vision I have for that scene and how to tell the story. And sometimes I'll jot down what lenses I think I need, or what perfect light I'm looking for, and all of that storyboarding went out the window because when I got there, it had grown from this little itty bitty eruption to this absolutely massive eruption that had originally started with just one little spatter cone, which you guys can see up there in the top right, to now three large fissures. So I had to basically readjust the whole approach I had in telling this story because this environment was so massive. So I mentioned I like being close, and that is because I love foreground. Foreground gives you depth, it gives you a perspective. It helps bring out textures as well. So this shot right here is the 14 to 24 millimeter, really, really close to this leading edge of the lava here, utilizing the spatter cone in the background to kind of create the symmetry within the image. Now, I'm also usually a fan with my landscape work with focus stacking, but if you've ever been near lava, there's a lot of heat waves that come off of it. So no matter how hard you try to focus stack, it's still going to look out of focus. So these shots that you guys are seeing, these are all essentially one focal point. They're not focus stacked here. But being really close, you get foreground, you get that depth, you get the texture here. One of the cool things about lava, no pun intended with cool, is that you see just it's land, it's ground, it's rock, it's all, moving, it's molten rock, but the way that it bends and it folds is quite hypnotic in a way. So by being really, really close, you see all those little folds. And if you've ever been to Hawaii, for example, and you've walked on some of the lava beaches there, you can see these kind of braids in the rock. And what you're seeing here is that braid happening right there as this molten rock is just folding over itself. And it's really, really crazy to see in person, but without being up close and personal, without having that wide angle lens, you're going to miss those moments there. Also, one of the things that I wanted to tell with my story out there is, um, if you've ever listened to Led Zeppelin, you know where I'm going with this. Iceland is the land of fire and ice, right? So I wanted to go out there while I was there during one of the times that it snowed to document this visual spectacle of like, fire and ice. But it's a very short window because lava, it's hot. It puts off a lot of heat. So by the time I got there the first time after a snowstorm, the lava had melted a lot of the snow around. So it just looked like lava on a brown landscape. So during this scene here, you can see it moving off in the distance, off in the background. There's a pretty heavy snowstorm that came through. So I hiked out through that and had to use GPS to find my way out there because it's literally like whiteout conditions. And by the time I got to this river here, I was still able to capture quite a bit of the snow with the lava here. And you can see how it's melted closer to the lava, but this was the best I could do. But I really, really wanted this shot because, once again, Iceland being the land of fire and ice, I wanted to have something that conveyed that as well. Something that people ask me quite a bit with shooting volcanoes, and especially in Iceland here, what is my favorite time of day to shoot? Middle of the day, if we go back here, it's nice. But I really love the twilight hours. I love the contrast and the warm and cool tones that you get. It is extremely difficult to photograph, though. You really need to pay attention to your histogram. There's quite a bit of dynamic range. So these images straight out of the camera are quite dark. And that's because I was using the dynamic range to essentially control the highlights. And then I would pull up the shadows and the blacks to recover those areas there. But once again, this time of day, blue hour, twilight, you get this really nice warm and cool contrast there. And the colors, they become so much more saturated and the lava looks fiery. So yeah, it's kind of like lightning. Shooting lightning during sunset and twilight, you have quite a bit more color and contrast. Same thing with lava. So how do you think diversely out there in trying to tell unique stories and create a story that's just not the same images over and over? So it's By using a variety of focal lengths. So the image on the left here is a 14 to 24. I found this area where the lava kind of created this small little S curve that led me up to the fissure. So it got down low here. This is an image where I was able to focus stack because there wasn't a lot of heat here. So set it up on the tripod vertically and focused on the closest points of that lava all the way out to the erupting lava, stack that together to have a really nice sharp depth of field all the way through. The image on the right, 24 to 70. I bring polarizers with me as well while I'm shooting volcanoes because the cooled lava is quite reflective. So if you have a scene where you have a lot of highlights on the lava, it's nice to throw a polarizer on there and rotate that polarizer, and that can help negate that color or that brightness. So I did that here on the right side, the right image. And what I loved here is this is looking straight down. I'm standing over this crack. So you can see there's cooling lava about a foot below me. And I loved, once again, the warm and cool color contrast there. Just also the crack. It's like you're peeking into the earth. And I like to say with the crack shots here, one of the reasons that I do take with me higher capacity cards, like a terabyte card, is because the last thing I want to do in environments like this, especially, is swap out my cards if I run out of space. So I shoot with really high capacity cards so I don't have to risk taking my card out and then dropping it, which has happened with some of my micro SD cards when I'm changing out drone footage. And, it ends up in a crack and I can't get to it. So higher capacity cards are my friend for volcanoes here. Also, variety of focal lengths. So this is shot on the 105 millimeter lens, which I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I throw in there to get down low and to capture almost these kind of macro-like shots where you can see the lava just peeling apart. Once again, it's just crazy to think about that this is molten rock and it's just being peeled apart, and it's eventually going to harden and be, the rock that we walk on. Different techniques as well. Playing around with shutter speeds is another way to tell a story. So the image on the right here, let's start with that. Faster shutter speed, 1/1000th of a second. Everybody refers to the shot as the chicken wing, and it's basically a piece of lava that's about 6 feet wide, just being projected up into the air and then pulled apart. And you can see all the different bends and folds in it before it comes crashing down and shatters on the earth. So 1/1000th of a second there freezes that motion, tells the very short lifespan of that lava as it's flying through the air before it crashes and breaks. Image on the left, it's like a lava waterfall, right? This is me taking I think it was a 6-stop neutral density filter, throwing it on front of the lens, and then slowing it down to, I believe, is a 2 or 3 second long exposure here to have the same kind of effect that you would with, say, a waterfall. But, shooting this shot at a fast shutter speed, it looks kind of boring. It's just kind of, it's rocky lava. I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of looks like the lava on the right, but just frozen into this waterfall, versus doing a longer exposure and creating that kind of silky look to it. It's a unique way, once again, to tell the story that, shows the flow of the lava, shows the speed of the lava. And it is something unique because you don't really see shots like that from a volcano. Panoramas as well. Just like storms, there are scenes out there with volcanoes that are just absolutely massive, too massive to convey with just a 14 millimeter or 12 millimeter. So this is an 8-image panorama of these huge rivers of lava that are flowing down from the main fissure that's probably about a mile away at this point, coming down into this valley, cutting through, and then going into the next valley. So 14 millimeter shot here just isn't going to tell the story as much as a panoramic image would. And then different perspectives, once again. These two images are shot out of an airplane. So I was trying to find a different way to show the scale of the eruption and show some different perspectives without using a drone. I did do quite a bit of drone photography out of here, but I did want to have some higher resolution stills where I had a little bit more dynamic range to work with at that time. So a buddy of mine who's a pilot in Iceland, we said, let's go fly. And so these two perspectives give you a just a different look at one of the fissures, that you wouldn't see from the ground level. And I think that's important when you tell a story of an event or a landscape or really anything, is to have different perspectives that open up your audience's, eyes or imagination to what is possible. Uh, Not everything needs to be super close. I mentioned I love being really, really close to eruptions, but on this day, I said, you know what? I'm going to go see if I can see it from the other side of Reykjavik, which is the capital of Iceland. The eruption had taken place about 20 miles away from Iceland, or from Reykjavik, sorry. But I wanted to go to the other side of the harbor to see if I can get the skyline with the eruption off in the distance. And this was the resulting shot there, shot on the 70 to 200 millimeter. So once again, not the most wow of images, but it is an image that helps tell a story and it helps bring people into, hey, you know what? That eruption is quite close to Iceland or to Reykjavik. I'm sorry. Um, you know, all good things come to an end. So I like to, if I can, have a closing image for a story. And this was that image when the eruption that began on March 19th of 2021 ended. And we did a flight, my buddy and I, who's the pilot, we did a flight over the crater just to make sure there's no lava in there. And there was no lava. The eruption was deemed over at this point. And it's quite fascinating to see it from the air because once again, you don't see all this yellow sulfur dioxide and from the ground level. So it was quite interesting to see all the colors that were spit amongst the landscape there from the eruption. Now, if you've been following Iceland at all, and then what's happened out there, there have been a lot more eruptions since this one. So, real quick, just to dive into that, I won't take too much time, but after the first eruption, there was a second eruption, which I did miss because I was teaching a workshop in Arizona that I couldn't leave. So I missed that eruption, but there was a third eruption that happened. And when the data was pointing to a third eruption that was possible, I had learned something from the first eruption, and that was as much as I shot during the time out there with the first eruption, I would have loved to have been there right at the start of it. So when this eruption started or was on its way, and the scientists were saying, "Hey, it's about to happen," I booked a plane ticket out there. And I went to Iceland. I said, you know what? I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait and I'm going to be there right as this eruption starts because I want to capture that moment. And I went out there and I waited. And I waited, and Iceland put a webcam up saying, "Hey, this is where we think the eruption is going to happen." And the funny thing is, I had 8 days between when I got out there and when I absolutely had to be back stateside for another project. And when I went out there on the third day, I was questioning some life decisions, and I felt pretty silly because I was like, you know what? The first eruption, it took 800 years, and here I am going. I have 8 days to catch this eruption. And you feel kind of silly when you put it that way. So on July 9th, I went up with a couple of friends and I said, "Hey, let's go at least scout the area in case it does happen. We know how to access it." So we went up there, and one of the craziest, scariest moments ever happened of my life happened. And when we're up there, a 5.6 earthquake hit. And being on the side of a mountain, when that kind of earthquake hits and the epicenter was only zero point 0.1 kilometers away, it's quite terrifying. You see rocks falling everywhere, the ground's literally kicking you off your feet. The sound is incredible. And that mountain straight out there, that triangular one, is killer. And when I regained control of myself after what had happened, I threw on the long lens, and you can see all of these rock falls that had happened. They'd kicked up the dust all around and shaken this landscape. And we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if this was the start of the eruption or just another powerful earthquake. And it was a powerful earthquake. It was not the start of the eruption. But the next day, the eruption did start. And it was a 7-mile one-way hike out there. And this was my first view about 2 hours or so after the eruption had started. And I got to the top of this mountain here and I said, oh my gosh, that is a lot of volume. And I kept my head straight to, I want to get close before I can't. And I booked it on down there. Another panoramic image right here, right about 30 feet or so away from the fissure. This is something that I really, really wanted to capture because once again, in the previous eruption, I wasn't able to get this close to the majority of the fissures because the lava had spread out so far. Um, Another couple shots of being right there up close and personal with it. You guys can see there's a variety of lenses used, 14 to 24, 24 to 120, 100 to 400, all different ways to tell the story here. Now, during this whole time too, I'm not just focusing on stills. I mentioned earlier, volcano work, I focus quite a bit on 4K, 8K video work. So I've got my tripod set up with one camera that is shooting. It's shooting on the 1 and 2 terabyte OWC Atlas cards, and I'm able to shoot 60 frames per second, 8K with that. And you'll see what that ended up producing here in a minute. But I've got one camera that's running video, and I've got one camera that is running stills. Now, the big challenge here that was different from the first eruption was there was a lot of moss here that was being burned. So you had to get very close to the fissures because you couldn't see through the smoke. And here's a quick little glimpse at what that looked like. So, fun fact as well, I had hair before I hiked through that. Just kidding. So once I got through the smoke, though, once being really, really close, is focusing on details again as well. The smoke was different than the previous eruption. Like I said, the previous eruption didn't really have a lot of this moss burning, but I found it quite fascinating. Created this very kind of ethereal feel to this already kind of apocalyptic prehistoric landscape. So I focused on incorporating that into some of the foreground as well and shooting a little bit slower shutter speeds at the time. There's a lot of wind, so maybe like a half a second, a third of a second creates a little bit of that motion blur and helps once again kind of convey the environment. And this shot here, both these shots are the same exact spot. Literally, the first one on the left is 1424, kind of tying in the source of the fires, right? You have this lava, extreme heat, it's igniting the moss, but then looking straight down, just a little bit more detailed shot helps tell the story once again of what's going on there. I mentioned just a second ago, very ethereal kind of feel to the environment. And the smoke was kind of a pain to deal with. Obviously, you saw I was wearing my gas mask. That was the only reason you'd find me in there, is having some sort of gas mask to help kind of make sure that I'm staying healthy in this. But it just really made it a different vibe than the first eruption. The first eruption was indeed beautiful, but this one just felt a little bit more mysterious with all of that smoke. Now, I got asked, and I like throwing this slide in here, how did you know when to go? Well, I literally sat and watched the webcam all day long. And when I saw this first hint here, I said a few words I can't repeat on a presentation, and I was out the door because this was my hint that an eruption had started. And once again, getting there early because things change quickly. I like showing this image. This image is the same scene taken about 30 minutes apart. So you can see how quickly an entire flow of lava can crust and cool and stop moving. So it was imperative to get there early and to get on things early in order to get the shots I wanted because, even though the image on the right shows the lava cooled and crusted, you can't walk on that. There's still molten lava underneath it. It's unsafe. So to get those up close shots that I wanted, I needed to be there right at the start of the eruption there. Couple drone images just to show you guys different perspectives here and to give you an idea of, once again, how quickly things change out there. So this is throwing the drone up probably about 3 hours after the eruption had started. You can see essentially, if you kind of play connect the dots, 3 different lines, 3 different fissures, right? One at the top, one kind of on the middle top, and then one at the bottom there. And that's how the earth was kind of opening up for this eruption. really, really impressive scene to see from the air. You could definitely see how quickly the lava was spilling out of that fissure and coming across the landscape. Now, what's quite impressive is a 24-hour difference here. So this is, like I said, a couple hours after the eruption started, and 24 hours later, this scene is now this scene. So you can see how it's built up an entire spatter cone. That spatter cone is probably pushing 60 feet tall at this point. The lava has spread out quite a ways. There's a higher volume now condensed in one area, coming down and flowing out. And then really, really close with the drone here. This is probably one of my favorite volcano shots I've ever taken. This was also the sacrifice of my drone at this point. It could not handle the heat anymore, and that is a drone that I successfully landed and is now retired because it cannot fly anymore. But the final shot that I took here, and I thought to myself, is this it? Is this the end? Am I going to document this volcano anymore after this? What's going to happen next? Well, this is my final look back. Just once again, a very surreal kind of ethereal feeling here with all this smoke and burning moss and this huge fissure off in the distance. And one last look back, and not knowing what the future was going to hold, I took this photo as like, hey, this might be my last photo here. The volcano has now erupted 6 more times. We have gone from this really friendly eruption that is tourist friendly to one that has destroyed the town of Grindavik. And I continue to document the eruptions to this day, telling the story of kind of how this whole eruption cycle has started off in 2021 from a very friendly, let's enjoy nature kind of eruption to one now that people are like, oh, okay, can this just be over now because people have lost homes and a whole city is no longer inhabitable. But to show you guys real quickly here, we'll wrap up on this. This is a small little 3-minute film that I put together from this event, this 2023 eruption, and it will include drone footage, it'll include static footage that's 4K 120, 8K 60, all shot on the Atlas Ultra cards, and I'll chime in at the end here and hope you guys enjoy it. Alrighty. So that is my small little presentation to you guys here. I'll keep that up there. If anybody wants to follow my work here, Mike Mez Photo on Instagram, MikeMezPhotography.com is my website. You guys can contact me there if you have any questions, or I do workshops as well. Everything for this year is sold out, but next year has got some spots open. And if you guys are still there, any questions or anything like that, we can definitely kind of nerd out and answer some questions here if there's any.
Dude. Wow. Wow. That was awesome. My
Thank you,
son's
thank
like
you.
hanging over. He's like hanging onto the camera. It's like, look, he's like, that was awesome. That was
Well, I
awesome.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So yeah, let me gather myself here. We did have
Okay.
questions coming in throughout. We'll start with a little gear question. I know you did
Yeah,
go
yeah,
over some
sure.
stuff
Yeah.
with gear and memory cards. We had a question coming in on what the fastest memory card that you've used is. I kind of want to spin it to, is there any minimum requirements that you need? I know you said I was actually shocked you used such a large capacity card, but it makes sense when you explained it. But as far as speed, do you have any
Yeah.
requirements for speed?
I've gotten spoiled. I'm not gonna lie. Like I kind of not look back on speed now because using the ultra cards, they've been handling everything. I will say in the past, before I was using those OWC cards, I was running into issues shooting 4K 120 on the Z8. And then I talked with Ian and John over at OWC, and they said, "Hey, try this out. You won't have any problems." And so that's why I've been using the Atlas Ultras now, is they've been flying through for everything that I need speed wise. And I don't want to quote the specs exactly on that, but I know for a fact that I took one of them up on a project, and I attached a Z8 to a wing of a plane, and I shot an hour and a half, 8K, 60 frames per second, and it worked like a champ. So my opinion is, the faster the better. But you kind of need to kind of take a look at the different speeds of what you need in regards to, like, if you're doing 4K 60 frames, 4K 120, stuff like that. So I can't give you exact numbers on that, but I will say that I've never run into any issues with the ultras.
Okay. What about workflow wise, Mike? Is it
Yeah.
just are you offloading to any external storage while you're out, or are you just focusing on shooting and handling all that after?
Yeah, no, no, definitely offloading. So, what I will do, am I on camera still? I can't
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I've got a couple of these guys here. So the Envoy Pros, the FX. So these are my go-to out in the field, as well as the Electrons. So whenever I come back from an outing, let's say for a volcano, right? I'm not ever offloading anything while I'm right there in the field, because it terrifies me. The environment's pretty crazy. But as soon as I get back to my hotel or my camper van, I am offloading everything from the cards to two different hard drives. So I have double backup, right? And at that point, once I'm double back up there, I will still keep my card with everything on it just because I'm absolutely paranoid, right? And I usually have enough cards to get me through an entire shoot if without running out of space. But then when I get home, then I will take the data off of the smaller SSDs and then back up to my Thunder Bay 8. And that's kind of where everything is stored at that point in time. And at that point, that's when you can go in, you can format, you can use Energize to, go ahead and sanitize the cards and get them back to square one. But I don't like to really delete anything because I'm terrified of maybe losing a hard drive or losing two hard drives while I'm out there, and I at least have the card still. But I'm always, always, always backing up to the externals at the end of every outing or every shoot or whatever that may be.
Yeah. I would cry if I took some of these images you're showing. I'm like, man, if I got that and I lost it, I would cry. I gotta ask. I'm
Yeah.
watching the drone footage at the end, and man, I thought I was risky for flying it into fireworks. I'm like, he's gonna stop. He's gonna stop. He's gonna stop. No, he's not gonna fly near it. I mean, did it really, like, talk us
It
through that shot?
Yeah, so I'm trying to find a quick little cell phone shot here to show you. There you go. I don't know if this is going to come through. Can you see that?
Let me see. Chip. critically overheated. Oh
Yep. So
no, wait,
that
it's landing.
it's a yeah, processor chip critically overheated. The aircraft is landing. So basically, what had happened with that shot there, we're talking about the one where I'm flying like pretty much into the crater.
Yeah.
I knew I had to fly back home the next day. And I knew, so what I was doing out there is every flight I would go out on the drone, I'd feel a little bit more edgy each time. And so what I would do is I would fly very conservatively at first, come back, take the card out, put a new one in. And that's the only time I switch cards really is when, I know I'm not going to lose my Z8, but I could easily lose a drone. So I'm swapping out cards out there in the field, which is still terrifying because the micro SD cards are so tiny. Um, and I'm getting a little bit edgier each time. And fun fact, the drone that I was using then, I had melted and repaired after the 2021 eruptions. So I was kind of in the,
You're playing with
I was
house
kind
money.
yeah, I was kind of in the mood of like, I should probably get the new drone that I want to get. So if I lose this one, I'm not going to be too upset, but don't lose the footage. So on the very last scene, I popped in a new card and I was like, this is my sacrificial drone now. If if I lose it, I lose it. But if I don't lose it, it's going to be pretty epic. And I flew it super close. And that's when I got the alert that said processor chip critically overheated and it was landing. And it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to bring it back, return to home. I'm just going to go down. And, down is a lava pool. And so I was able to override that and bring it back. But when it flew back, it was like, you know, um, it was that awkward drone in the sky, let's call it. It kind of had bits and pieces just dangling off of it. It was coming in at like a 45-degree angle. And it was officially retired after that flight. But yeah, so that's and now I've got the new Mavic Pro 3 and a couple of buddies of mine that I document with. They joke around. They're like, it's got a 3x zoom on it. You don't have to get that close. And I'm like, no, we're still getting close. Because I don't know. I love feeling close with a drone rather than zooming in. Same with the long lens.
We're
So
gonna do Mike's travel gear tips. It's like just melt everything that you bring and you don't have to bring
yeah.
anything home.
Yeah, exactly. Like tripods, drones. That's why you
That's
got
it.
insurance, right?
Yeah, seriously. I'm like, man, you're putting the insurance. I know most people that get the insurance, they never use it. You're making up for the rest of us.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
That's awesome. Question on lightning
yeah,
triggers. Do you ever use a
yeah,
lightning trigger?
yeah, yeah. So is there a specific question to it or just ever
No,
use
just
them?
if you ever
Okay.
use them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so let's see here. As I'm sitting here at my desk, I think I might have loaned it. I use there it is. The Myops Smart Trigger.
Awesome.
This guy right here. So I use that one. Now I don't use it for sunset, twilight, dark shots or night sky shots. I use it for daytime lightning, and as you guys heard me talk about, daytime lightning can be quite challenging at times. So having a trigger in the daytime can be rewarding in getting you a shot here and there. But what you really need with these kind of triggers is something called staccato lightning. So basically, you need a lightning bolt that will strike and then strike again. So basically, what the trigger does is it sees that initial strike, opens your shutter in hopes of capturing, milliseconds later, the return strike. So they can be, no pun intended, hit or miss. It can be where, it gets the bolt because it's, a bam, bam kind of lightning bolt, or just misses it because it's a big old, what we call positive bolt. That's just like a one and done. So lightning triggers are not a slam dunk. A lot of people have the kind of misconception if you use lightning trigger, you turn it on, it's going to capture all the lightning. You still have to have a very specific type of lightning for that trigger to work. So I've used triggers and I've gotten great shots. I've used triggers and I've missed shots. And I've not used a trigger and I've gone the time lapse route and I've gotten great shots. And I've not used a trigger, gone the time lapse route, and the bolt strikes on my interval. So that's why it can be so frustrating. But triggers, they can work, but at the same time, they're not perfect.
Awesome. Good question here. How do you
Yeah,
practice, or is there any realistic, practical way to prepare for some of these photos? It's like most people at home, it's like you don't have a volcano in your backyard. Most of the storm, I don't think I've
yeah.
ever seen clouds like the ones you're taking photos of. So how do you prepare for that for the people who might be going someplace traveling to get some images like this, but they don't have access to anything like that?
It's a little bit of vinegar and baking soda.
Take it back to
Yeah,
fifth grade.
exactly, right. Yeah, this, these kind of subject matters. I wish I could say, in regards to volcanoes, not really much you can practice with. If you look back at some of my first volcano images documented Kilauea in 2015, 16, I look back at them and I cringe because I'm like, gosh, the opportunity I had, and I just was horrible at my compositions and my techniques, and so that just really, I think volcanoes comes with experience. Storms, if you live anywhere where you can get any sort of, lightning, you don't have to have the perfect foreground, right? Or the perfect scene. You could just go outside and practice, shooting along exposures and pointing at the sky. Um, I don't want to sound, like this is a paid advertisement, but I do offer storm tours that are with Tornado Alley or Monsoon Lightning in Arizona. Those are great ways to practice. And those are great ways to have like myself or one of my guides, David Erickson, stand next to you and help you get the shots and understand where to look with the storm and understand how to compose and understand, how to set your settings for specific scenes. Those are probably the best ways. And I mentioned earlier, I don't encourage anybody to go storm chasing. There's so much that you have to know to keep yourself safe. But I would say some sort of tour, some sort of storm tour would be a great way to learn that way. Yeah, and like you said, these storms, this storm right here that's up right now, that what we call this in Texas, this is called Tuesday. But most people in Northeast or from the West Coast, they see this and they think this is the apocalypse.
Yeah,
we,
right.
yeah, we stand
I've
outside, we
never.
look at these. So
That's insane. No, so the link, can we find that just on your website? Is there a link to that on your website to check that out? We always love to support our speakers, and we love when our viewers are supporting our speakers as well. So no, definitely feel free to plug anything away.
yeah,
We drop the links in there, to the website. So definitely all of our viewers out there, check that out. We're gonna sneak one last picture,
all right,
one last picture. Yeah, I wish we could sneak more pictures, and we're gonna sneak one last question in.
okay.
What websites do you use to monitor earthquakes and predict upcoming eruptions?
Yeah, so each location's different, right? So Kilauea, Mauna Loa, anything in the United States, you're monitoring through the USGS websites. They have earthquake diagrams, essentially we call it there, where you can monitor the earthquakes, you go with the frequency, the depths. You can also monitor tilt meters, which are showing the inflation and the deflation within a volcano. Iceland, they have their own version. It's called Vidar. It's V as in Victor, E, D, E, or no, sorry, vedur.is. And you can monitor the earthquakes there. And they actually do some write-ups too, talking about when they expect the next eruptions to take place. Guatemala, you have Insavume. So basically, all of them they're like geological web pages that volcanologists will put data up on. So I wish I had I could tell you one. There isn't one, but if you want to monitor like Kilauea right now, for example, if anybody wants to kind of nerd out over the next week or two, Kilauea looks like it's getting ready to erupt, and Kilauea is in Hawaii. So if you go to the USGS website or Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory, you can start seeing some of the data associated with Kilauea. And Kilauea may erupt within the next week or two. It's probably actually going to happen in perfectly, let's call it 8 days, because I'll be in Africa. So I'm call 8 days from now it's going to erupt. But yeah, any sort of USGS site, they'll have links for different volcanoes within the United States that you could kind of monitor some of the data there. But the tilt meters, the earthquake swarms, those are pretty good starting points.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough, man. This was awesome. I think we've had just as many comments as questions of people just blown away by the work. So just incredible what you do. Everyone, of course, our viewers, of course, we want to bring him back. Yeah, we'll have to get you back in the future. I don't think even I never thought I'd say an hour and a half isn't enough to watch a presentation, but it's like, yeah, I don't think I could have sat here for a couple hours and watched that stuff. It was clearly awesome.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity. And if anybody has any questions too, like my website, I do recommend if you go to my website, there's a newsletter sign up, and that's where you can see like some tips and tricks. You could also see the latest workshops, the storm chasing workshops. They sell out usually 3 to 5 minutes a year in advance. But there, to drop a subtle hint, there may be one that's going to be opening for next year. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So yeah, that's a good place to kind of stay in tune with any storm workshops. Or if you guys have questions, just shoot me a question on the contact page. So,
Awesome. And to all my friends, my
uh,
birthday's coming up. Hint, hint. Mike, I want to thank you again, man, for your
yeah,
time, expertise. It was great having you on. And to OWC, the entire team over there,
yep.
Chris, thank you especially for your help in getting this set up, and to all of our viewers out there. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll let Mike go get back to storm chasing for now, and we'll get back to what we do best, free education here in the B&H event space. But that is all we have for you today. Another edition in the books. Catch y'all next time.